Hello ladies and gentlemen, today I'm going to be talking to you about independent and dependent variables. Our objective states I will be able to determine independent and dependent quantities from problem situations. So we have some vocabulary in this unit. Our first vocabulary word that I want you to know is what is a function. A function is just a fancy name for a relationship between two variables. Anytime one quantity affects another quantity, we say they have a functional relationship. So that's just another variation of this word here, function. Let me just give you an example. The speed you drive your car and the distance that your car travels are related. So that is a functional relationship. That is an example of a function. Again, it's just a fancy name for a relationship between two variables. Those two variables, one of them is called the independent and the other one will be called the dependent. So starting with the independent one is the one that you get to choose. It's freely chosen and it will affect the other variable. Now, when we get to our equations, we're going to be using an x value to represent our independent variables. Sometimes we'll even use this word input for the independent variable. But that should be pretty easy to remember because of the two letters that are at the beginning of both words. The independent variable is the input. So again, the independent variable is the one that you get to choose and it affects the other variable. So the variable it ends up affecting is the dependent variable. It's the one that depends on the other variable. Okay? And we use the letter Y to represent the dependent variable, and sometimes we'll even call it the output. So please make sure that you understand that when I use the term independent, I'm also referring to the input or the x value. When I use the term dependent, another name for that is the output or the y value. So you should be able to use these three words here interchangeably. Now, I have an example. I don't need you to write this one, but this is just a basic example. Hopefully you can follow along. This is going to help you understand what's the difference between independent and dependent. It says the number of days since your last haircut and the length of your hair. So think about that for just a second and try to decide which is the one you get to choose and which is the one that gets affected by your choice. You should say that the number of days since your haircut is the one that you get to choose. You can decide if you're going to go 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, however long. This is the one you get to choose. So that's the independent one. Now what that's going to do though is it's going to affect the length of your hair. This is going to be the dependent one. It depends on the number of days since your last haircut. So let's go through some more examples. Name the independent and the dependent. So we have Jordan squeezes 6 oranges to get 2.5 cups of orange juice. So let's start with the independent variable. The one we get to choose is how many oranges we get to squeeze. The one that gets affected by that is how many cups of orange juice. Another way I could say that is that the cups of orange juice I have depends on how many oranges I squeeze. Okay, let's try another one. Jessica has a summer job that pays $6.50 per hour. Her total pay for one day is $32.50. Okay, so the one that we get to freely choose is how many hours Jessica is going to work. She gets to choose how many hours she's going to work. But what's going to get affected by that is her total pay. Another way I could say that is her total pay depends on how many hours Jessica works. Okay, so hopefully you understand the difference between those two, independent, dependent. Let's talk about a table of values. A table of values is an organized way of displaying the input and the output values of a function. So the independent and the dependent variables, or again, the x and the y values. What you're going to be given is a list of x values, which represents your input. And what you're going to be doing is you're going to be inputting these in for x and for the independent variable. So let me go ahead and give you an example here. 5 times 2 plus 1. What that's going to do is it's going to create your output. 5 times 2 is 10 plus 1 is 11. So notice I'm putting in my independent variable, my input, and I'm getting back out my dependent variable, my output. And I'm creating a table of values along the way. Let's try another one. -1. Now I'm going to put that in as my input. 5 times -1 plus 1. This part would be -5 plus 1, -4. I'm creating a table of values. The last one I'm going to put in is 12.5. So it's going to be 5 times 12.5 plus 1. I'm going to work that off to the side, since I'm not quite sure what that is off the top of my head. I got 62.5 plus 1 is going to get me 63.5. And again, this is a list of all my input. This is a list of all my output. This is my independent. This is my dependent. And this whole thing is called a table of values. So this is going to be the on your own example, the you try. I want you to look at this situation, identify the independent, dependent variable, and then fill in this table of values. This should be ready the next day you come to class.